Imagine you're deep underground, in the soot-filled tin mines of Cornwall, England. Your lamp flickers in the darkness, the air is thick and hard to breathe, and then you hear something. A rhythmic tapping sound echoing through the tunnel walls. It seems to be getting closer. In the darkness, the shadows flicker and you swear that you see something moving in the shadows. You may have just witnessed a knocker, the mysterious being said to live in the tin mines of Cornwall. So what were these strange underground creatures? Why are there so many almost identical versions of this creature around the world? And if you visited a mine today, would you still see them? Welcome to the mysteries of mythology, the Knockers. I've always approached folklore with a skeptical but open mind. And the Knockers, though less popular than most folklore, is perhaps one of the most interesting of all the cryptids. These aren't just random ghost stories, they're detailed, consistent accounts that are found across different continents and centuries. The Knockers, or Knackers as they're sometimes called, were said to dwell in the tin mines of Cornwall and Devon in England. Most miners never saw them clearly, they just heard them, or noticed the things they did, like moving tools or taking food that wasn't left for them. But a few do claim to have seen them. And always, the stories include the knocking sounds echoing through the tunnels. I've read that sometimes the Knockers help miners find ore or warn them of cave-ins, but they had a darker side too. Sometimes that meant only stealing tools, but at their worst, it meant leading men to their deaths. So miners developed rituals to keep the Knockers happy. They left offerings, made clay figures as shrines, and kept one important rule: never to whistle underground. When miners did catch glimpses of the Knockers, they described small humanoid figures, maybe 2 or 3 feet tall, with grotesque goblin-like features who looked like tiny miners. They wore mining clothes, carried small pickaxes, and wore little helmets, boots caked in mud, like looking at a dark reflection of themselves. The knocking gave them their name, and it wasn't random, it followed patterns. Experienced miners said they learned to read the sounds like a language. A quick series of knocks might lead you to a rich vein of ore, or a slow, heavy pounding meant the roof was about to collapse. But the Knockers' behavior could be completely unpredictable. They might tap on the wall and lead you to tin that would feed your family for months. But the next day, those same helpful beings might hide your tools, or even worse, lead you down a tunnel that collapsed behind you. This split personality terrified miners more than anything. You never knew which version you might get. Some versions of the lore say that it was the spirit of Jewish slaves that the Romans brought over to work in the tin mines. Miners didn't really worry about where the Knockers came from. They just needed to know how to keep them satisfied, because ignoring the Knockers could get you killed. So what exactly did miners do to stay on their good side? And what happened when someone broke the rules? Cornish miners had strict rules for dealing with the Knockers. One of the most important rules was the offering. Every day, miners would save the last bite of their pasty and throw it into the darkness of the mine shaft. Some left crusts of bread, others poured out a bit of tea. If you forgot your offering, your tools might vanish, or worse, the Knockers might go silent when danger was coming. But the strangest rule was about whistling. You could sing, talk, shout, even curse, but whistling would aggravate them. Nobody knew why. Some said it mocked their sounds. Others believed it disrupted their work. Whatever the reason, veteran miners would physically stop anyone who tried. These rituals weren't optional. Miners genuinely believed the Knockers were real, and that ignoring them could cost you your life. But if the knockers were unique to Cornwall, we could leave it at that. A local legend born from local history, except they're not unique to Cornwall at all. When Cornish miners left home in search of work, they brought their legends with them, and something strange happened in those foreign mines. They found other knockers. Hey everyone, this is Eddie. If you'd like to help this channel, then please leave a like and let me know what you think of the knockers in the comments. It really makes a huge difference. Thank you. In the 1800s, Cornwall's tin mines were closing as the ore ran out. Miners travelled to America, where gold and silver rushes promised fortune. These Cornish miners, called Cousin Jacks, brought their expertise to the mines of Pennsylvania, California, and Colorado. They taught American miners their techniques, their songs, their safety procedures, and their stories about the knockers. Except in America the name changed. The knockers became the Tommyknockers. The Tommy comes from the nickname for British men or soldiers at the time. At first, American miners thought their Cornish coworkers were crazy. Little men in tunnels, spirits that knock on walls. But then American miners started hearing the sounds for themselves. The same rhythmic tapping, the same warnings before cave-ins. The Tommyknockers behave exactly like their Cornish cousins. They'd lead miners to rich veins, knock warnings before disasters, and they hated whistling just as much. American miners began leaving offerings too, bits of sandwich or cornbread instead of pasties, and slowly the legend took root in American soil. Some details did change. American Tommyknockers were sometimes described as ghosts of miners who died in the accidents, rather than ancient spirits, more mischievous pranksters than dangerous protectors. But the core remained the same: small humanoid creatures living in the mines, making knocking sounds, helping or hindering depending on the mood. In the early 1900s, miners across America knew about the Tommyknockers. There's even an interesting story where, after a large mine had closed in 1956 and the owners sealed the entrance, several generations of Cousin Jacks circulated a petition calling on the mine owners to set the knockers free so that they could move on to other mines. And the owners complied. But while the Cornish miners were spreading their legends across America, researchers were discovering something remarkable. Cultures that had never heard of Cornwall were telling the exact same stories. Now this is where I think it gets a little more interesting. Cultures that had never heard of Cornwall, that had no contact with English miners, were telling exactly the same stories. There were some that were even closer to home. In Wales, miners told stories about the Bluecap and the goblin-like, small goblin-like creatures that knock on mine walls, lead miners to metal veins, warn of cave-ins, and hate whistling, nearly identical to Cornwall. In North England, there was the more helpful Bluecap, which appeared as a flickering blue light that led miners to coal veins and pushed heavy carts to the surface. Miners valued them so much that they left full miners' wages for it every 2 weeks. They paid it like an employee. But those same mines also had cutty-somes, a sinister entity that loved cutting through ropes when nobody was looking. Cross to mainland Europe, and the stories get older. As far back as the 1500s, German miners told stories about kobolds, goblin-like creatures that lived in the rocks and made distinctive knocking sounds. The kobolds were quite vicious. They led miners to beautiful blue ore, but it released toxic arsenic gas when smelt, killing miners and making everyone sick. The miners called the cursed metal Kobold ore, goblin ore. That's how the chemical element cobalt got its name. traveling further away east to Ukraine, and miners feared the Shubin. Some stories said it helped lost miners find their way to the surface. Others claimed it caused terrible accidents on purpose. Now, let's cross the Pacific again, but this time to South America, and to a time and place that never knew of Cornish miners. In South America, Peruvian miners have known about the Muqui for centuries. The Muqui is described as a goblin elf creature that lives underground and wears mining gear. It helps miners by softening rock. It warns them of danger, but displease it, and it causes cave-ins. To keep the Muqui happy, miners give it cocoa leaves and alcohol. But probably the most disturbing version comes from Bolivia. In the mines of Cerro Rico, miners worship an entity called El Tío, the uncle. This demonic-looking figure has statues throughout the mine, built by the miners themselves. Every single day, workers leave offerings of alcohol, cigarettes, and cocoa leaves at El Tío's feet. On special occasions, villagers slaughter a llama and offer its heart to El Tío. The country is devoutly Catholic. Above ground, they go to church, pray to God, and live Christian lives. But below ground, their prayers belong to El Tío. Despite all this worship, about 14 men die in those mines every single month. The same patterns everywhere: small humanoid creatures, knocking sounds, helpful and harmful, offerings required, whistling forbidden. These cultures never met. A Peruvian miner in 1400 never even heard of Germany. So why are the stories identical? Maybe these stories didn't spread from one culture to another at all. Maybe they came from something deeper, something all humans seem to sense in the dark. I always try to find a rational explanation. For most of human history, caves and underground spaces meant danger, predators hid in caves. You could get lost and never find your way out. Darkness meant danger, and even death. Our ancestors who feared the underground survived. Those who didn't, they didn't pass on their genes. So perhaps when we descend into the earth, something ancient wakes up in our minds. A primal warning system that says, "You don't belong here." The humanoid shape makes sense too. Humans are wired to see faces and human forms. It's called pareidolia. We see faces in clouds, in wood grain, in shadows. In the uncertain darkness of a mine, that instinct goes into overdrive. I also spoke in my Bloody Mary video about an experiment where, under dim light conditions, all participants would hallucinate faces. Mines have bizarre acoustics. Sounds travel strangely, water drips rhythmically, and rocks create distinctive cracking sounds before cave-ins, almost like warnings. Add to that exhaustion, fear, and dim lighting, and hallucinations become likely. These theories work for some of it, but here's what they don't explain. Why does every culture imagine the same small, humanoid creature wearing mining gear? Why do they all hate whistling? Why do offerings become ritual across continents that never communicated? Psychology explains why people might see things. Acoustics explain the knocking sounds. But the consistency, that specific detail that repeats across cultures, that's harder to explain away. In Robert Hunt's 1865 book about Cornish folklore, he mentions that miners refused to let anyone draw a cross on the mine walls. They'd tell them to change it into something else. Hunt connected this to their reports of seeing little demons and imps underground. And remember those Bolivian miners? Devout Catholics above ground, but below ground they worshipped El Tío, a demon. Could it be that they believed God's power ended at the surface? Why would religious miners believe that the earth itself is outside of God's domain? Maybe when you're deep underground, the normal rules don't apply. You're in a space that feels fundamentally other, ancient, wrong somehow. And maybe that feeling isn't completely psychological. Because here's the thing, if all of this is just acoustics and exhaustion and collective psychology, why haven't the stories stopped? Even today, with electric lights and modern ventilation, with radios and safety equipment, miners still report strange things. The old superstitions should have died with modernization, but they haven't. In Brian Long's book, Presence in the Pit, he collected recent accounts from British miners, modern men working in the late 1990s and early 2000s. They describe glowing shapes that rush past them, shimmering clouds that seem intelligent, screaming sounds with no source, dark figures moving through solid walls. One miner encountered a shapeless dark figure in an abandoned tunnel. It let out an ear-piercing scream and rushed straight through his body. He quit the next day and never went back. These men only wrote their stories down years later, anonymously fearing ridicule. Which makes you wonder, if these few felt brave enough to finally share their experiences, how many others saw things and never told anyone? So what are they? Maybe the Knockers, the Tommyknockers, the Kobolds, maybe they're not spirits. Maybe they're not hallucinations either. Maybe there's something we don't have words for yet. Something that exists in the deep places of the earth, in spaces humans were never meant to go. Something that notices when we dig into their territory. The thing that knocks in the dark. The thing that's been there all along. For thousands of years, humans have dug into the earth searching for treasure, and for thousands of years we've heard the knocking sounds in the darkness. Whether they're protective spirits, psychological echoes, or something we can't explain, the knockers remain one of mining's greatest mysteries. The mines are mostly closed now, but the stories refuse to die, because deep down we all know the truth. Some places were never meant for us, and something down there knows it too. What do you think the knockers really are? Protective spirits watching over miners, psychological phenomena born from fear and darkness, or something we haven't figured out yet? Let me know your theory in the comments below, and if you've enjoyed exploring this mystery, leave a like to help others discover it too. Until next time, stay curious.